Sarah Martinez had always been good at blending in. At 32, she looked like any other woman walking through downtown Portland on a Friday evening. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans, sneakers, and a lightweight jacket that concealed more than most people would ever imagine. The casual observer might notice her confident stride or the way her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, but they would never guess that she had spent the last 8 years as one of the Navy's most elite warriors. The transition from military life to civilian life had been harder than any mission she had ever undertaken. After completing her service with SEAL Team 18, one of the Navy's most classified units, Sarah found herself struggling to find her place in a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The constant adrenaline, the brotherhood of her team, the clear mission objectives, all of that was gone, replaced by job interviews, apartment hunting, and the strange quiet of a life without purpose. Tonight, she was walking back from her part-time job at a local gym where she worked as a fitness instructor. It was honest work, but it felt like using a precision instrument to hammer nails. Her body was a weapon forged by years of the most intense training imaginable, her mind sharpened by experiences that would break most people, and yet here she was, helping suburban moms learn proper squat form. The gym had closed at 9, and the streets were relatively quiet as she made her way toward her small apartment 6 blocks away. Portland's downtown area had seen better days, and she had chosen this particular route because it was well lit and usually busy enough to feel safe. Tonight, however, seemed different. The usual foot traffic was lighter, and the familiar comfort of crowds was absent. As she turned onto 5th Street, Sarah noticed the black sedan parked at the corner. It had been there when she arrived at work 4 hours earlier, and something about its positioning struck her as wrong. The car was angled in a way that gave the occupants a clear view of both directions, and the windows were tinted just dark enough to obscure the interior while still allowing the passengers to see out clearly. Her training kicked in automatically. Without changing her pace or giving any outward sign that she had noticed anything unusual, Sarah began cataloging details. The license plate was local, but the car was too clean, too nondescript. It was the kind of vehicle that someone would choose if they wanted to watch without being noticed. The engine was running, she could see the slight tremor in the exhaust and hear the low rumble that most people would miss. 3 blocks from the gym, Sarah decided to test her suspicions. She ducked into a 24-hour convenience store and pretended to browse the magazine rack near the window. The black sedan pulled away from the corner and drove slowly past the store before parking again half a block down. 2 men in dark clothing sat in the front seats, and the passenger was definitely watching the store entrance. Sarah's heart rate remained steady, but her mind began running through possibilities. Random crime was always a concern in this neighborhood, but this felt more organized. The men in the car were patient, professional. They weren't looking for a quick robbery or a crime of opportunity. They were hunting. She purchased a bottle of water and left the store, continuing her original route. The sedan followed at a distance, maintaining just enough space to avoid being obvious to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for surveillance. But Sarah was looking, and she recognized the patterns from her own training in reconnaissance and target acquisition. 2 blocks later, she turned into an alley that she knew would take her toward her apartment building. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and loading docks for the shops that faced the main street. It was darker here, with only a few scattered streetlights providing illumination. Most people would avoid this route, especially at night, but Sarah knew that sometimes the best way to deal with a threat was to control the environment where the confrontation would occur. The black sedan's headlights appeared at the mouth of the alley moments after she entered it. The car moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator that knew its prey was cornered. Sarah kept walking, her breathing steady, her mind automatically calculating distances, angles, and potential weapons in her environment. When she was roughly halfway through the alley, the sedan accelerated and pulled alongside her. The passenger window rolled down, and Sarah got her first clear look at her pursuers. Both men were in their 30s, athletic builds, with the kind of careful grooming that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. The passenger had a spider tattoo visible on his neck, and his eyes held the flat, calculating look that she had seen in men who had killed before. "Sarah Martinez," the passenger said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. It wasn't a question. She stopped walking but didn't turn to face them directly, keeping her body positioned so she could move in any direction. "Do I know you?" "You know enough," the driver replied. He was larger than his partner, with graying hair and scars on his hands that spoke of violence and experience. "Get in the car." "I don't think so," Sarah said calmly. The passenger's hand moved inside his jacket, and Sarah caught the glint of metal. "This isn't a request." "I figured as much." Sarah's voice remained steady, almost conversational. "Mind if I ask what this is about?" "Operation Crosswind," the driver said, and Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Crosswind had been one of her team's most classified missions, a deep reconnaissance operation in Eastern Europe that had gone sideways in ways that were still classified above her former clearance level. 3 team members had died, and the official reports had been sanitized to the point of fiction. "That was a long time ago," she said. "Not long enough," the passenger replied. His hand was definitely on a weapon now, though he hadn't drawn it yet. "Some people think you know more than you've been telling. Some people are wrong." The driver leaned forward, and Sarah could see his face clearly for the first time. There was something familiar about his features, something that nagged at the edges of her memory. "Sarah, you've got 2 choices here. You can get in the car and we can talk somewhere private, or we can finish this conversation right here. Either way, you're coming with us." "Actually," Sarah said, taking a small step backward, "I think there's a third option." The passenger started to get out of the car, his hand finally emerging from his jacket with a black pistol. It looked like a Glock 19, standard issue for a lot of agencies, and he held it with the practiced grip of someone who knew how to use it. His partner remained behind the wheel, but Sarah could see that he was reaching for something as well. "The thing is," Sarah continued, her voice still calm despite the weapon now pointed at her chest, "you guys made a mistake." "Yeah," the passenger said, stepping closer. "What's that?" "You assumed I was alone." The passenger's eyes flicked quickly around the alley, searching for backup that Sarah knew wasn't there. But his moment of distraction was exactly what she had been waiting for. In one fluid motion, she stepped inside his guard, her left hand striking his wrist and forcing the gun up and away from her body while her right elbow drove into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over. The gun went off, the bullet ricocheting off the brick wall above them. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space of the alley, but Sarah was already moving. She grabbed the passenger's gun hand with both of hers and twisted sharply, using his own momentum against him as she stepped behind him and applied a textbook disarming technique that her instructors had drilled into her thousands of times. The Glock clattered to the ground, and the passenger stumbled forward, gasping for air. Sarah scooped up the weapon and spun to face the driver, who was now out of the car and pointing what looked like a .45 automatic at her. "Drop it," he shouted, but Sarah was already moving again. She dove behind a dumpster as his first shot rang out, the bullet sparking off the metal container inches from her head. From her position of cover, she could hear both men communicating in the short, clipped phrases of professionals under fire. "She's got Hayes's weapon." "Copy." "Moving to flank." "Negative." "Too much exposure." Sarah smiled grimly. Their tactical communication was good, but they were thinking like law enforcement or intelligence operatives. They were trying to contain and capture, not eliminate. That meant they needed her alive, which gave her a significant advantage. She popped up from behind the dumpster just long enough to acquire her targets and fire twice. Both shots were deliberately wide, designed to force them back toward their vehicle rather than to inflict casualties. The passenger, who was apparently named Hayes, scrambled for the cover of the sedan's engine block while the driver moved to put the car between himself and Sarah's position. "Sarah," the driver called out, "this doesn't have to go this way. We just need to talk." "Then, put your weapons down and we can talk," she replied, keeping her voice calm while her mind worked through the tactical situation. She had 1 magazine, probably 15 rounds, minus the 3 that had already been fired. 2 hostiles with firearms, unknown ammunition count, vehicle for escape and cover, possible backup en route. "You know we can't do that." "Then, we have a problem." What happened next would depend entirely on how badly they needed her alive and how willing they were to escalate. Sarah had a feeling she was about to find out just how much her former teammates had told their interrogators about Operation Crosswind, and whether the people hunting her now were interested in justice or just cleanup. The driver's radio crackled to life, and Sarah caught fragments of the transmission. Target engaged, alley between 5th and, backup requested. So they did have support coming. That changed the equation significantly. Sarah needed to end this quickly, or she would find herself outnumbered and outgunned in a position with limited escape routes. But ending it quickly meant making choices that her former self would have made without hesitation, and her current self wasn't sure she was ready to make. In the distance, she could hear sirens. Whether they were heading for this location or just responding to other calls in a busy city was impossible to know, but it meant that time was running out for everyone involved. The passenger, Hayes, made his decision first. He broke from cover and sprinted toward the far end of the alley, clearly intending to circle around and catch Sarah in a crossfire. It was a good tactical move, but it exposed him for several seconds as he crossed the open ground. Sarah could have taken the shot. Hayes was moving in a straight line, and even in the poor lighting, he would have been an easy target for someone with her training. Instead, she shifted her aim and put 2 rounds into the ground directly in front of him, forcing him to dive for cover behind a loading dock. "Warning shots," she called out. "Next ones won't be." The driver, apparently realizing that his partner was pinned down and backup was still minutes away, tried a different approach. "Sarah, my name is Marcus Webb. I worked with your team leader, Commander Patterson, before he died." The mention of Patterson's name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Commander James Patterson had been more than just her team leader, he had been her mentor, the man who had seen something in her that even she hadn't recognized and had pushed her to become the warrior she had become. His death in a training accident 2 years after Operation Crosswind had been one of the reasons she had finally left the service. "Patterson never mentioned you," she replied, though she had to fight to keep her voice steady. "He wouldn't have. My work was compartmentalized, even from his team. But I know about the intel you brought back from Crosswind, and I know there are people who think you kept some of it for yourself. I debriefed completely. I believe you. But there are others who don't, and they're not interested in due process." The sirens were getting louder, and Sarah could see flashing lights beginning to reflect off the buildings at the mouth of the alley. Whatever was going to happen, it needed to happen now. "So what are you?" she asked. "CIA? NSA? Some off-the-books contractor? Does it matter? What matters is that we can protect you, but only if you come with us willingly." Hayes had worked his way around to a position where he could see Sarah's hiding spot, and she knew he was probably lining up a shot. But she also knew that Webb wasn't lying about needing her alive. The question was whether Hayes understood that, or whether he was operating under different rules. "The people who are coming for you next won't offer you a choice," Webb continued. "They'll just eliminate the problem and worry about the intel later." "And you're different how?" "We still believe in the Constitution." Sarah almost laughed at that. In her experience, the people who talked most about the Constitution were often the ones least likely to follow it. But there was something in Webb's voice, a note of genuine conviction, that made her hesitate. The radio in their car crackled again, and this time the transmission was clearer. "Unit 7 to Webb. We have possible police response to your location. Recommend immediate extraction. Copy, Unit 7. Stand by." Webb raised his voice. "Sarah, we're out of time. My people can provide protection, but you need to make a decision right now." The police sirens were very close now, and Sarah could see the glow of searchlights beginning to probe the entrance to the alley. In moments, this would become a multi-agency incident, and her chances of walking away cleanly would disappear entirely. But there was still something that bothered her about the whole setup. If Webb and Hayes were really government agents trying to protect her, why the surveillance? Why the guns drawn and the threats? Why not approach her openly and present credentials? "One more question," she called out. "If you're the good guys, why does your partner have a spider tattoo on his neck?" The silence that followed her question told her everything she needed to know. In the military and intelligence communities, certain tattoos were markers, ways for people with shared experiences or allegiances to recognize each other. The spider tattoo, specifically, was associated with a very particular kind of mercenary outfit, the kind that took contracts from people who needed problems solved without official oversight. Hayes, Webb said quietly, but his voice carried clearly in the enclosed space of the alley. She's asking about your ink. So that tattoo marks you as Blackwater alumni, and Sarah here is smart enough to know that Blackwater doesn't send people to rescue former SEALs. The admission hung in the air like smoke from the gunshots. Sarah felt her grip tighten on the stolen Glock as the pieces began to fall into place. These weren't government agents coming to protect her. They were contractors, hired guns sent to clean up a loose end that had been dangling for too long. The question now was whether Webb had just made a mistake, or whether he had deliberately revealed his partner's true nature as some kind of test. The police lights were sweeping into the alley now, and Sarah could hear vehicle doors slamming and officers calling to each other. In seconds, this situation would spiral completely out of control, and she would find herself trying to explain to local cops why she was in a gunfight with people who might or might not be federal agents. Time to make her choice. Sarah made her decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. As the police searchlights swept closer to their position, she broke from cover and sprinted directly toward Webb, using the element of surprise to close the distance before he could react. His .45 was trained on her previous hiding spot, and, by the time he realized she was moving, she was already too close for him to adjust his aim safely. She hit him with her shoulder in a perfect tackle, driving him backward against the side of his sedan. The impact knocked the wind out of him and sent his weapon skittering across the asphalt. Before he could recover, Sarah had the Glock pressed against his throat and his arm twisted behind his back in a control hold that would snap his shoulder if he tried to resist. "Hayes," she called out, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded life-and-death situations before. "Your partner is in my control. Come out with your hands visible or I'll assume you're trying to flank me." "Don't hurt him," Hayes replied, his voice tight with tension. "He's got kids." Then, he should have thought about that before he tried to kidnap a former SEAL in an alley. Sarah adjusted her grip on Webb, making sure he could feel the cold metal of the gun barrel against his carotid artery. "Now come out slowly, and keep your hands where I can see them." Hayes emerged from his position behind the loading dock, his empty hands raised to shoulder level. He looked younger than Sarah had initially thought, probably late 20s, with the kind of lean build that spoke of recent military service. His eyes held a mixture of fear and respect that told her he understood exactly how dangerous his situation had become. "Good," Sarah said. "Now both of you are going to listen very carefully, because the police are about 30 seconds away from turning this corner, and you're going to need to decide whether you want to be here when they arrive." The radio in their car was crackling with increasingly urgent transmissions. "Webb, respond. We have multiple units converging on your location. Extract immediately." "You hear that?" Sarah asked. "Your backup is getting nervous. They're probably watching this whole thing through thermal imaging or satellite feed, and they know you've lost control of the situation." Webb's breathing was labored from the impact, but he managed to speak. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're dealing with. The people who hired us, they're not going to just walk away from this." "Then, tell me who they are." "I can't. Even if I wanted to, I don't have names. We get our contracts through intermediaries, and the money comes from accounts that don't officially exist." Hayes took a small step forward, and Sarah immediately shifted the gun in his direction. "Stay where you are." "Look," Hayes said, "Webb's telling the truth about one thing. This isn't going away just because you got the drop on us tonight. There are other teams, other contractors. Someone wants you dead badly enough to pay serious money for it." "Because of Operation Crosswind?" "That's what we were told. Something about classified intelligence that you supposedly kept when you left the service." Sarah felt a cold knot of understanding begin to form in her stomach. She had suspected that her former teammates had been interrogated after Patterson's death, but she had assumed it was routine debriefing. If someone was hiring mercenaries to eliminate her 2 years later, it meant that whatever information they thought she had was still valuable enough to kill for. The problem was, she genuinely didn't know what they were talking about. Operation Crosswind had been a disaster from start to finish, a reconnaissance mission that had turned into a running firefight across 3 countries when their insertion had been compromised. By the time they had reached their extraction point, half the team was dead and the intelligence they had gathered was fragmentary at best. "What exactly do they think I know?" she asked. Webb tried to turn his head to look at her, but she pressed the gun harder against his throat. "Stay still. The briefing we received mentioned weapons transfers, Russian military technology being sold to terrorist organizations. The intelligence your team gathered supposedly included details about the buyers, the routes, the financing. We never got close enough to gather that kind of detail. The mission went to hell before we could complete our primary objectives. That's not what our employers believe." The police sirens had stopped, which meant the officers were probably on foot now, moving carefully through the adjacent streets and alleys. Sarah estimated she had maybe 2 minutes before they found the black sedan and started asking hard questions about the gunshots that had been reported. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You're going to get in your car and drive away. You're going to report to whoever sent you that I wasn't where you expected to find me, and that you'll need to try a different approach." "They'll know we're lying," Hayes said. "That's your problem. The alternative is explaining to the Portland Police Department why 2 contractors with illegal weapons were trying to kidnap a veteran in an alley." Webb's radio crackled again. "Webb, respond immediately or we're aborting." "Answer them," Sarah ordered. Webb keyed his radio with his free hand. "Control, this is Webb. Target was not at expected location. Returning to base for reassessment." There was a pause, then, "Copy, Webb. Extract immediately." Sarah could hear voices now, police officers calling to each other as they began their systematic search of the area. She needed to end this situation and get clear before she became a person of interest in whatever report they were going to file. "Now get out of here," she told Webb, stepping back and lowering the gun but keeping it ready. Webb straightened slowly, rubbing his throat where the gun barrel had left a mark. "This isn't over, Sarah. I know. The next team they send won't try to take you alive. I know that too." Hayes had already moved to the driver's side of the sedan, and Webb climbed into the passenger seat. As the car's engine roared to life, Webb rolled down his window. "For what it's worth," he said, "I hope you figure out what they think you know before they figure out where you are." The black sedan pulled away just as the first police officer appeared at the mouth of the alley, his flashlight beam sweeping across the space where Sarah stood. She had already tucked the Glock into her jacket and was walking calmly toward the opposite end of the alley, just another pedestrian trying to avoid getting involved in whatever incident had brought the police to this location. But, as she reached the street and blended into the sparse late-night crowd, Sarah's mind was racing through the implications of what she had just learned. Someone with significant resources believed she possessed classified intelligence that could damage their operations. They were willing to hire professional killers to eliminate her, which meant they considered her a serious threat. The problem was, she genuinely didn't remember gathering any intelligence during Operation Crosswind that would be worth killing for 2 years later. The mission had been chaos from the moment they had inserted, and most of what they had seen had been combat footage and casualty reports rather than strategic intelligence about weapons sales or financing networks. Sarah found a 24-hour diner 6 blocks away and settled into a corner booth where she could watch both the entrance and the street outside. She ordered coffee and tried to think through everything she could remember about the mission that had apparently made her a target. Operation Crosswind had been a joint task force operation, combining Navy SEALs with CIA operatives and Army Special Forces. The official mission brief had called for deep reconnaissance of suspected weapons trafficking routes through Eastern Europe, but, like most special operations missions, the reality had been more complicated than the paperwork suggested. They had inserted via halo jump into a remote area of Romania, with orders to observe and document the movement of military equipment from Russian sources to buyers in the Middle East. The intelligence suggested that advanced weapons systems, possibly including components for chemical or biological weapons, were being moved through a network of shell companies and criminal organizations. But their insertion had been compromised within hours. Someone had known they were coming, and the reception committee had been waiting with automatic weapons and body armor. 3 members of her team had been killed in the initial contact, and the survivors had spent the next 72 hours fighting their way across hostile territory to reach their extraction point. Commander Patterson had been wounded in the first firefight but had refused evacuation, leading the team through a running battle that had covered more than 50 miles of enemy-controlled territory. By the time they reached the extraction zone, Sarah had been the only team member still in fighting condition, and Patterson had been barely conscious from blood loss and exhaustion. The intelligence they had gathered consisted mainly of photographs taken during brief moments when they had been able to observe enemy positions, radio intercepts of communications in languages that none of them spoke fluently, and fragmentary documents recovered from vehicles they had captured during their escape. Sarah had filed a complete report immediately after their return, including every piece of physical evidence and every detail she could remember about their observations. The debriefing had taken 3 days, with multiple intelligence analysts going through her account line by line to extract every possible piece of actionable information. But, now, apparently, someone believed she had kept something back. Either they thought she had lied during her debriefing, or they believed she had gathered additional intelligence that she hadn't reported. The question was whether they were right. Sarah pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts, looking for someone who might be able to help her understand what was happening. Most of her former teammates were either dead or had disappeared into the black world of classified operations, but there were a few people who might still be reachable. She found the number she was looking for and hesitated before dialing. Marcus Chen had been the CIA liaison on Operation Crosswind, one of only 2 agency operatives to survive the mission. He had left the CIA shortly after the operation and had gone into private consulting, which usually meant he was selling his expertise to the highest bidder. But he was also one of the few people who had been present for the original intelligence gathering and might know what someone thought she was hiding. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. Chen Consulting. Marcus, it's Sarah Martinez. There was a long pause, then, Jesus, Sarah. Where are you calling from? Why? Is that important? It might be. There have been people asking about you, people with the kind of credentials that make it hard to say no to their questions. What kind of people? The kind who don't give names and don't explain why they want to know. But they've been thorough. They've talked to everyone who was involved with Crosswind, and they've been asking very specific questions about what intelligence we gathered and what we did with it. Sarah felt the cold knot in her stomach tighten. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. During the mission, did we gather any intelligence that wasn't included in the official reports? What do you mean? I mean anything. Documents, photographs, intercepted communications, anything that might have been overlooked or deliberately omitted from the debriefing. There was another pause, longer this time. Sarah, are you in some kind of trouble? Someone just tried to kidnap me. 2 contractors with government connections and enough firepower to handle a SEAL. They said I had classified intelligence from Crosswind that I never reported. Shit. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sarah, you need to get somewhere safe and stay there. Don't use credit cards, don't go home, don't contact anyone else from the team. Why? What aren't you telling me? Because there was something we found during the mission, something that didn't make it into the official reports. And if the wrong people think you have access to it, they'll do whatever it takes to make sure you don't talk. What was it? Not over the phone. Can you get to Seattle? I can be there by tomorrow. There's a coffee shop called Grind on Pine Street, near the Pike Place Market. Be there at 2 in the afternoon, and come alone. And, Sarah? Yeah? Watch your back. If they send contractors after you once, they'll do it again. And, next time, they might not try to take you alive. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in the fluorescent lighting of the diner. Outside, the city continued its late-night rhythm, unaware that somewhere in its shadows, people were making decisions about who lived and who died based on secrets that had been buried for 2 years. Sarah paid for her coffee and left the diner, her mind already working through the logistics of getting to Seattle without leaving a trail that could be followed. She would need to avoid airports and train stations, which meant driving. But first, she needed to acquire transportation that couldn't be traced back to her, and she needed to do it without involving anyone else in whatever web of violence was closing around her. As she walked through the nearly empty streets of Portland, Sarah reflected on the bitter irony of her situation. She had spent 8 years training to defend her country against enemies foreign and domestic, only to discover that the most dangerous threat she faced came from people who claimed to be on the same side. But they had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of her capabilities. They had treated her like a problem to be solved rather than a warrior to be respected. And that mistake was going to cost them more than they could possibly imagine. Because Sarah Martinez hadn't survived Operation Crosswind by being lucky or by following orders blindly. She had survived by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than the people trying to kill her. And those were skills that didn't disappear just because she had traded her uniform for civilian clothes. The hunt was on, but the hunters were about to discover that their prey had teeth. The stolen motorcycle wasn't much to look at, but it would get Sarah to Seattle without leaving the kind of digital trail that a rental car or bus ticket would create. She had acquired it from a 24-hour parking garage using techniques that her SEAL training had never officially covered but that every operator learned through necessity. The bike's owner would report it missing eventually, but by then, Sarah would be long gone. She made the 4-hour drive through the night, pushing the motorcycle hard through the winding mountain roads that connected Portland to Seattle. The cold air bit through her jacket, but the discomfort helped keep her alert and focused on the task ahead. Every few miles, she checked her mirrors for the telltale signs of surveillance, but the roads remained empty except for the occasional long-haul trucker. Seattle's Pike Place Market was crowded even in the early afternoon, with tourists and locals mixing together in the kind of chaos that made surveillance difficult but not impossible. Sarah had arrived early and spent an hour walking through the market, memorizing faces and looking for the subtle signs that would indicate professional watchers. She found Marcus Chen exactly where he had promised to be, sitting in a corner table at Grind with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. He looked older than she remembered, with gray threading through his black hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. But his posture was alert, and his eyes constantly scanned the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had spent years operating in hostile territory. "You look good," he said as Sarah slid into the seat across from him. "Military life agreed with you." "Past tense," she replied. "I'm out, remember?" "Right. How's civilian life treating you?" "People keep trying to kill me. Other than that, it's been great." Marcus smiled grimly. "Yeah, I heard about your encounter in Portland. Word travels fast in our community." "From who? Does it matter?" "The point is, you stirred up some serious attention. The kind of people who hired those contractors don't like loose ends, and they especially don't like loose ends who can fight back." Sarah leaned forward, keeping her voice low. "Marcus, what did we find during Crosswind that didn't make it into the reports?" Marcus glanced around the coffee shop, then pulled out his phone and activated what looked like a white noise app. "Okay, but you need to understand something first. What I'm about to tell you could get both of us killed. The only reason I'm willing to talk is because they're already trying to kill you, and silence isn't going to protect either of us anymore." "Understood. During the mission, after we lost Patterson and the others, you and I ended up hiding in that abandoned warehouse outside Bucharest. Remember?" Sarah nodded. It had been during their second day of running firefights, when they had been forced to take shelter in what had once been a textile factory. They had spent 6 hours there, treating wounds and trying to contact their extraction team while enemy forces searched the surrounding area. While we were there, you found something in the office area. A safe that had been left open, with documents inside. I remember the safe, but I thought it was empty. It wasn't. There were financial records, transfer orders, communication logs. All in Russian, but with enough English notations that we could understand what we were looking at. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall the details of that night. she had been running on adrenaline and pain medication, focused primarily on staying alive long enough to reach extraction. But, now that Marcus mentioned it, she did remember finding papers scattered around the abandoned office. The documents showed that the weapons trafficking operation we were investigating was much bigger than anyone had suspected. We weren't looking at random criminal activity or even state-sponsored terrorism. We were looking at a systematic effort by elements within the Russian military to sell advanced weapons technology to the highest bidder, including groups that were officially designated as enemies of both Russia and the United States. That doesn't sound like something worth killing people over 2 years later. That's because I haven't told you the important part yet. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The documents included a client list. Names, organizations, payment schedules. But, more importantly, they included the names of American officials who were facilitating the transfers. Sarah felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. Americans? High-level Americans. People with the kind of security clearances and political connections that would make this information extremely dangerous to possess. Why didn't we report it? We did. I turned everything over to my handler at CIA, along with a complete translation and analysis. But, the intelligence never made it into the official record of the mission. Why not? Because one of the names on the client list was my handler's supervisor. And another one was a deputy director at NSA. And a third was a sitting member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sarah stared at Marcus, trying to process the implications of what he was telling her. You're saying that our own intelligence agencies buried evidence of treason because it implicated their own people? I'm saying that the intelligence we gathered during Crosswind revealed a corruption network that went all the way to the top of the national security establishment. And, when the wrong people found out about it, they made sure the evidence disappeared. But, if the evidence disappeared, why are they coming after me now? Marcus pulled a small device from his pocket, something that looked like a combination of a USB drive and a satellite phone. Because I made copies before I turned the originals over. And, because I told my handler that I had shared the information with my teammates as a security precaution. You told them I had copies? I told them I had given copies to everyone who survived the mission. It was a lie, but I thought it would keep all of us safe. Mutually assured destruction, you know? They couldn't eliminate one of us without risking that the others would release the information. Except now they're trying to eliminate us anyway. Because they think the threat is over. Patterson is dead, supposedly from a training accident. Jackson died in a car crash 6 months later. Williams had a heart attack at 34, which is unusual for someone in his physical condition. I'm pretty sure they think I'm dead too. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. The training accident, the car crash, the heart attack. All suspicious when you consider them together. But, individually, they look like the kind of random tragedies that happen to people in high-stress occupations. Which leaves me. Which leaves you. The last surviving witness to intelligence that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the American government. Sarah looked around the coffee shop, suddenly, aware that every patron could be a potential threat. Marcus, why are you telling me this? If you've managed to stay off their radar for 2 years, why risk exposure now? Because I've been investigating what happened to our teammates, and I think I know who's behind the cleanup operation. More importantly, I think I know how to stop them. Marcus activated his phone again, this time opening what looked like an encrypted messaging app. The device I showed you contains not just the original documents from Crosswind, but also everything I've gathered over the past 2 years about the corruption network we uncovered. Financial records, communication intercepts, surveillance footage. Enough evidence to destroy careers and send people to prison for the rest of their lives. So why haven't you released it? Because releasing it would have gotten me killed without accomplishing anything useful. The people we're dealing with have the resources to discredit any evidence I could produce, and they have enough friends in the media and law enforcement to bury the story before it could do any damage. But, now that they're actively hunting me, now we have leverage. They've made a mistake by going after you directly. It demonstrates a level of desperation that suggests they're vulnerable in ways they weren't before.
Sarah studied Marcus's face, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation. She had trusted him during the mission, but 2 years of running intelligence operations as a private contractor could change a person in fundamental ways.
What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we go public with everything.
Not through normal channels, but through someone with enough credibility and independence to make sure the story gets told correctly.
And who would that be?
Marcus slid a business card across the table.
Jennifer Walsh.
Investigative journalist, former military intelligence officer, currently works for a news organization that specializes in national security stories. She's been investigating corruption in the intelligence community for 3 years, and she has sources at every level of government.
You've already contacted her? I've been in preliminary discussions.
She's interested, but she needs corroboration from multiple sources. Your testimony, combined with the documentary evidence I've gathered, would give her everything she needs to break the story. Sarah picked up the business card, noting the Washington, D.C. address.
And you think going public will protect us? I think it's our only option.
The alternative is to keep running until they eventually corner us or until we make a mistake that gets us killed.
There's a third option.
Which is?
We find them first. Marcus shook his head. Sarah, these aren't terrorists or foreign agents we're dealing with.
These are American officials with legitimate government resources.
We can't just eliminate them and expect the problem to go away. I'm not talking about elimination.
I'm talking about gathering enough evidence to prove what they've done, but doing it on our terms instead of waiting for a journalist to do it for us.
That's essentially what I've been doing for 2 years. No, that's what you've been doing as a single person working alone.
But now there are 2 of us, and one of us has training in direct action operations. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Sarah, you're talking about conducting operations against American government officials on American soil.
That's not just dangerous, it's treason. Is it treason to expose traitors? It is if you use illegal methods to do it. Sarah stood up, pocketing the business card.
Marcus, I appreciate everything you've told me, and I understand the risks. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life running from people who think they can kill American soldiers to protect their own corruption.
So what are you going to do?
I'm going to find out who hired those contractors, and I'm going to make them understand that hunting a Navy SEAL was the biggest mistake they ever made. Marcus grabbed her arm as she started to leave.
Sarah, wait.
If you're determined to do this, at least let me help.
You'll need intelligence support, technical resources, financial backing. Why would you want to help?
You said yourself that staying hidden has kept you alive for 2 years.
Because Patterson was my friend too.
And because Williams and Jackson deserved better than being murdered by their own government. Sarah looked down at Marcus's hand on her arm, then back at his face. She saw determination there, and anger, but also fear. He was offering to help, but he was also terrified of the consequences.
If we do this, there's no going back.
Once we start actively investigating these people, they'll know we're a threat and they'll do everything in their power to stop us.
I know.
And if we're wrong about any of this, if there's an innocent explanation for what happened to our teammates, we'll have destroyed our own lives for nothing.
I know that too.
Sarah made her decision.
Okay. But we do this my way.
No half measures, no hesitation, and no mercy for anyone who tries to stop us.
Marcus nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Everything you've gathered on the corruption network. Financial records, communication intercepts, personnel files.
I also need you to reach out to your contacts and find out who's been asking questions about the Crosswind survivors.
And then?
Then, we're going to pay them a visit and explain why targeting Navy SEALs is generally considered a bad idea. As Sarah walked away from the coffee shop, she felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the military, a sense of purpose. For 2 years, she had been drifting, trying to find her place in a civilian world that felt alien and meaningless. But now she had a mission again, and it was the most important mission she had ever been given. She was going to find the people responsible for murdering her teammates, and she was going to make them face justice. The only question was whether the justice would come through the legal system or through the more direct methods that her training had prepared her to use. Either way, the hunt was about to begin in earnest. And, this time, Sarah Martinez was going to be the hunter, not the prey.